this episode, we begin a domain that brings together many of the ideas people most often associate with security, but we are going to approach it in a way that makes sense for a beginner who is still building the bigger picture. Domain 5, Protection of Information Assets, is about far more than locking down computers or blocking unauthorized access. It is about understanding what the organization is trying to protect, why that protection matters, and how different types of controls work together to reduce the chance of loss, misuse, exposure, or damage. For someone preparing for the CISA exam, this domain is important because it connects policy, governance, access decisions, physical safeguards, and technical protections into one larger responsibility. Once you see that information assets include not just data, but also systems, devices, records, facilities, and the supporting processes around them, the whole domain starts to feel less like a collection of separate topics and more like one connected story about preserving value. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A strong place to begin is with the phrase information asset itself, because the word asset changes how we think about what is being protected. An asset is something the organization values and depends on, which means information becomes more than just bits stored in a file or records sitting in a database. Customer data, employee records, contracts, financial reports, intellectual property, system configurations, source code, backup files, and even paper documents can all be information assets if their loss or misuse would hurt the organization. This matters because people sometimes protect information casually, as if it is just part of daily operations, rather than recognizing it as something that carries business, legal, operational, and reputational importance. When an organization treats information as an asset, protection becomes a deliberate responsibility rather than an afterthought. That mindset is central to this domain because good security begins with knowing what has value, where it exists, who uses it, how sensitive it is, and what would happen if it were exposed, altered, unavailable, or destroyed. From there, it helps to understand the main goals of protecting information, which are often described through confidentiality, integrity, and availability, CIA. Confidentiality means information is accessible only to people or systems with authorized access. Integrity means the information remains accurate, complete, and trustworthy, and availability means the information and supporting systems are usable when needed. These three goals sound simple at first, but they shape nearly every control decision in this domain. If customer records are exposed to the wrong people, confidentiality has failed. If financial data is quietly altered, integrity has failed. If a critical application is unavailable during business hours, availability has failed. A beginner should notice that security is not only about secrecy. Many people hear security and think only of hiding information, but the organization also depends on being able to trust information and reach it when necessary. This wider view makes the domain easier to understand because it shows that protection is about preserving usefulness and trust, not just preventing outsiders from seeing data. Another major idea in this domain is that protection must follow the life of the information, not just its final resting place. Information is created, received, processed, stored, shared, archived, and eventually destroyed, and the risks can change at each stage. A record may begin as a simple form, move into a processing system, be copied into reports, stored in backups, sent to partners, and later retained for legal or business reasons before final disposal. Each of those steps creates different protection needs. Information can be exposed during transmission, changed during processing, copied into the wrong repository, retained too long, or discarded insecurely. This means asset protection is not just about securing one database or one network. It is about thinking through the entire journey of information and recognizing that weak handling at any point can undermine the rest of the control environment. For a beginner, that lifecycle view is useful because it explains why security topics that seem separate, such as retention, access, storage, and disposal, are actually connected parts of one protection responsibility. Classification is another concept that gives structure to the whole domain, because organizations do not protect every piece of information in exactly the same way. Some information is public and can be shared widely with little risk, while other information is sensitive, internal, confidential, restricted, or regulated and therefore requires stronger handling rules. Classification is the practice of grouping information according to its sensitivity, importance, or impact if compromised. That matters because security controls should be appropriate to the value and risk of the asset, not applied blindly without context. A public marketing brochure does not need the same protection as payroll data, source code, or medical records. When classification is done well, it helps the organization decide who should have access, how information should be stored, whether encryption is needed, how long records should be retained, and how disposal should occur. For someone learning this domain, classification is important because it turns protection from a vague idea into a set of decisions tied directly to the nature of the information being handled. Protection of information assets also depends on layers of control because no single safeguard can address every risk on its own. Organizations use administrative controls, technical controls, and physical controls together to reduce exposure and create defense in depth. Administrative controls include policies, standards, procedures, roles, training, and management oversight. Technical controls include access restrictions, encryption, monitoring, authentication, system configuration, and other automated enforcement mechanisms. Physical controls include locks, badges, cameras, environmental protections, and barriers that help protect facilities, devices, and media. A beginner should pay attention to the fact that good protection is usually built through combinations rather than isolated tools. A locked server room without access reviews is incomplete. Strong passwords without clear user provisioning rules are incomplete. Well-written policies without enforcement are incomplete. This domain teaches that protection works best when people, process, and technology support one another, because different controls address different weaknesses and help compensate when another safeguard is bypassed, misused, or simply not enough on its own. Access is one of the most visible parts of this domain because many protection failures happen when the wrong person gets access, the right person gets too much access, or access is not removed when it should be. Information should be available to those who need it, but only to the degree that their role and responsibilities justify. That is why organizations focus so much on the principle of least privilege, which means giving users only the access they truly need in order to do their work. This helps reduce accidental exposure, insider misuse, and damage caused when an account is compromised. Role-based access, approval workflows, periodic reviews, and timely removal of accounts all support this idea. What matters for a beginner is understanding that access control is not simply a login screen. It is an ongoing discipline of deciding who gets access, why they get it, how that access is monitored, and when it changes or ends. This domain keeps returning to that idea because access decisions are some of the most direct ways an organization protects the confidentiality and integrity of information assets. Identity is closely related to access because before the organization can decide what someone should be allowed to do, it has to know who that person or system actually is. Identity management helps establish, maintain, and verify digital identities for employees, contractors, service accounts, customers, and devices. Once those identities exist, the organization can connect them to appropriate access rights and authentication methods. Authentication is the process of proving identity, often through something the user knows, has, or is, while authorization determines what the validated identity is permitted to do. These concepts are easy to blend together at first, but the distinction matters. A person may successfully prove who they are and still not be authorized to view certain records or modify certain systems. Domain 5 treats identity as foundational because a weak identity process can undermine nearly every other protection measure. If accounts are shared, stale accounts remain active, or identity proofing is careless, the organization loses confidence in whether access decisions actually reflect real people and legitimate business need. Another important part of protecting information assets is recognizing that not all threats are purely digital. Physical and environmental conditions can threaten information just as seriously as malware, stolen credentials, or network attacks. A device can be stolen, a file cabinet can be accessed by the wrong person, a fire can damage records, flooding can destroy equipment, unstable temperature can harm hardware, and a power issue can interrupt services or corrupt data. This is why protection of information assets includes facility controls, media handling, visitor management, surveillance, environmental monitoring, and resilience measures such as fire suppression and power protection. For a beginner, this is a useful corrective to the common belief that security lives only inside software and networks. Information assets exist in real places and depend on real conditions. If someone can walk out with a laptop full of sensitive data, or if a poorly protected facility loses critical equipment to environmental failure, the protection program has still failed. Domain 5 encourages a much broader view of what it means to keep information safe. The domain also depends heavily on the idea of data handling, which includes the everyday habits and processes that determine whether protection works consistently in practice. Information may be created securely and classified correctly, but poor handling can still lead to exposure or loss. Sensitive files might be emailed to the wrong recipient, stored in an unsecured location, printed and left unattended, copied to removable media without controls, or retained long after business need has ended. Proper handling means that storage, transmission, sharing, retention, and disposal all reflect the sensitivity and value of the asset. This is where policies become operational. A classification label means little if employees do not know how that classification changes what they should do with the information. In a beginner-friendly way, this topic teaches that security is not only about large systems and advanced threats. It is also about disciplined routine behavior, because information assets are often lost through ordinary handling mistakes long before a dramatic attack ever occurs. Encryption often appears in conversations about asset protection, and it is useful to understand it as one important control rather than a complete solution by itself. Encryption helps protect information by making it unreadable to unauthorized parties unless they have the proper key or method of decryption. It can support confidentiality for data at rest and data in transit, which makes it especially valuable when information is stored on portable devices, transmitted across networks, or kept in environments where exposure risk is higher. At the same time, encryption does not solve every protection problem. It does not automatically prevent poor access decisions, improper retention, inaccurate data, or weak identity processes. It also depends on sound key management, because poorly protected encryption keys can reduce the whole control to a false sense of safety. For a beginner, the most important point is that Domain 5 is not about memorizing one favorite safeguard. It is about understanding how specific controls fit into a larger protection strategy that still depends on classification, access control, process discipline, and governance. Monitoring and review also play a major role, because protection is not something the organization sets once and then assumes will remain effective forever. User access changes, systems evolve, threats shift, and employees make mistakes, so controls need observation and adjustment over time. Monitoring may involve reviewing access logs, watching for unusual activity, checking whether policy requirements are being followed, and identifying when sensitive information is being handled in risky ways. Periodic reviews of user rights, system configurations, data repositories, and physical safeguards help the organization detect drift between what the protection model intended and what actually exists in practice. This is especially important because many asset protection failures are not caused by dramatic single events. They grow quietly through stale permissions, poor exceptions, weak oversight, or changes that were never fully evaluated. For the learner, this part of the domain reinforces the idea that security is a continuous control activity. Protection is sustained through attention, measurement, and correction, not just through initial design. From an audit perspective, Domain 5 is especially valuable because it gives the auditor many ways to evaluate whether the organization's protective controls are appropriate, effective, and aligned with business risk. An auditor may ask whether information assets have been identified, whether classification rules exist and are followed, whether access rights match job responsibilities, whether physical safeguards are working, whether sensitive information is handled correctly, and whether monitoring or review processes actually detect problems. The point is not merely to confirm that policies exist on paper. The point is to understand whether the organization's protection model is real in daily practice. If leadership says critical data is restricted but employees can access it broadly, that gap matters. If backup media is unencrypted, if terminated users still have active accounts, or if facilities housing critical systems are poorly controlled, those are meaningful weaknesses. This is one reason the domain matters so much on the exam. It brings together business intent, control design, operational behavior, and evidence of whether the organization is truly protecting its information assets the way it claims to. A common beginner misconception is that protecting information assets is mostly the job of the security team or the information technology department. In reality, this domain touches nearly every part of the organization because people in many roles create, use, approve, store, share, and dispose of information every day. Managers influence access approvals, human resources, HR, affects onboarding and offboarding. Facilities teams support physical protections. Legal and compliance teams shape handling requirements. And employees across departments either strengthen or weaken protection through their everyday choices. Another misconception is that stronger security always means making information hard to use. Good protection is meant to support the business by reducing unnecessary risk while still allowing legitimate work to happen efficiently. That balance is important. If controls are weak, information is exposed. If controls are unrealistic, people work around them. Domain 5 teaches that effective protection is not about making everything harder. It is about making the organization more trustworthy, more resilient, and more disciplined in how it handles what matters. By the end of this overview, the main idea to carry forward is that protecting information assets is one of the clearest ways an organization turns security principles into daily operational reality. Domain 5 is broad because information exists in many forms, moves through many processes, and depends on many kinds of controls, from classification and access management to physical security, handling practices, and ongoing review. What ties the domain together is the understanding that information has value, and that value must be protected across its full life cycle by using layered controls that support confidentiality, integrity, and availability. For a new CISA student, this domain becomes easier once you stop seeing it as a list of disconnected topics and start seeing it as one coordinated effort to preserve trust in the organization's information and the systems that support it. That perspective will make the next topics feel more natural because each one is really another piece of the same larger mission, protecting what the organization knows, uses, and depends on.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.